these central banks have shown that they're tremendous at keeping liquidity abundant. What do they do when we move to a new phase? We reopen this economy, happens slowly, could get weak growth, and they're sitting there with a ton of debt, and we start to doubt ability to pay. Not ability to borrow, ability to pay in the years to come.
They keep on pointing to the fiscal agency and say, it's about you. We can deal with liquidity, you deal with default risk. The problem, John, and that's why I was so uncomfortable about them going into high yield, they're already half pregnant. They already are underwriting significant default risk. It's one thing buying fallen angels, investment-grade names that have been downgraded to high yield. It's a completely different issue when you start buying the index. And I think that makes them half pregnant, so they cannot clearly separate between what is a fiscal operation and what they're doing now, which is quasi-fiscal operations.
We've seen spreads tighten, for sure, but as you know, and I know, and we've discussed, there are parts of this credit market that are still lagging massively. And one might point directly to the airlines at the moment, and maybe some of the industrial names as well, retail and elsewhere. But for the airlines, I think a lot of people would sit here, Mohamed, and say they are the exception. You don't agree with that. Can you tell me why you don't agree that the airlines are the exception right now?
So there's been a lot of narrative right from the beginning that they are the exception. We should treat them differently. And why are they the exception? Because they've seen such simultaneous destruction in both people traveling, the demand side, and also how many people they have employed, et cetera, the production side. But today's numbers tell you it is a much wider phenomenon. They are not the exception. They are a leading indicator. And the longer the economic dislocations continue, the more we'll have other sectors that are hit. Restaurants. What do you do with restaurants? Open Table just estimated that a quarter of the restaurants aren't coming back. That looks like airlines, by the way. So, one has to be really careful about treating the airlines as exceptions. I don't. I treat them as a leading indicator of what could happen if, A, the economic dislocations continue for a long time, and B, the relief efforts cannot get to it quickly enough.
What I hear from you, Mohamed, is that you're expecting a default deleveraging cycle that's going to weigh on growth. Would that be a fair characterization of what you're expecting?
It is. That's why I keep on stressing balance sheets as the most important indicator to look at. Too many people have dismissed this earnings seasons as a look-through, as not containing much economic information. I think that's wrong. Balance sheet, and which means what does access to capital look like? What does the cash burn look like? What are cash balances? And how much debt is there? And it's not just, we've been talking about it in terms of companies, but it's also a sovereign issue around the world. And for investors in emerging markets in particular, it's a really important issue.
Mohamed, let me wrap up the conversation this way with this question. What would be your stop? The point at which you would have a series of signposts that said, I wasn't right about this. This could be better. We could get a better outcome.
If it turns out, which is my hope, but I have to stress, it is my hope. If it turns out that as we reopen, we can do so without big health risk, and we see the consumer and business re-engaging quickly. It is my hope that this will happen, but the evidence so far suggests that it's just a hope. We need a lot better. And remember, Eric Schmidt put it brilliantly. The best way to think about this, John, is it's an information failure. And the information failure is when I meet you, I don't know whether you can infect me or not. And until we deal with this information failure, and there's several ways of dealing with it, people are going to hesitate. And as long as people hesitate, this economy does not come back in a way that it can come back.